This aircraft, weighing more than 200 tons, was about to become nothing more than a glider over the dark Atlantic Ocean, without a single engine. Thousands of feet of deep ocean below, darkness of night above, and no runway anywhere nearby to land on. Friends, before this day in the history of commercial aviation, there had never been a recorded case of all the fuel being lost due to a fuel leak. There was no pilot who had ever dealt with a situation like this. No training manual, no checklist, no precedent. Nothing existed that could tell the pilots what to do now. Hello friends, it was around 11 at night on August 23rd, 2001. There was an atmosphere of activity at Toronto's Pearson International Airport. During the summer season, there was a crowd of people at the gates. Families, couples, students, everyone was boarding their respective flights from different gates. And at one of these gates, Air Transat, a Canadian Airlines flight TSC 236, was standing. A regular overnight flight going from Toronto to Portugal. There were 293 passengers and 13 crew members, meaning a total of 306 people on board. Most of the passengers were Canadian of Portuguese origin, who were going to Portugal during their summer vacation. At 12:52 at night on August 24th, this flight takes off from Toronto. 24 for takeoff 246. It had to cross the entire Atlantic Ocean to reach Lisbon, Portugal. Just a few minutes after takeoff, this plane reaches an altitude of 39,000 feet and continues ahead on its journey. The passengers had dinner, some people watched movies, the children fell asleep, and slowly the cabin lights became dim. Just like a completely normal transatlantic flight, this aircraft was peacefully passing over the Atlantic Ocean in the darkness. From the outside, everything appeared completely normal. It was. But meanwhile, something was happening in the cockpit that would make this flight one of the most dangerous flights in aviation history. The people sitting on this flight did not know that a time bomb was ticking. In the middle of the ocean, all the fuel of this plane was soon going to run out, and both of its engines were going to shut down. On top of that, the command of this flight was in the hands of a pilot who had spent years in prison serving a sentence on drug smuggling charges. But no one on the plane knew about this secret of his. The beginning of this problem, friends, had happened about 9 days earlier, where a difference of a few millimeters had written this plane's fate. It was August 15, 2001, when during a routine inspection of this plane, Air Transat's maintenance team found metal chips in the oil system of its right engine. This was a very serious sign that something was wrong inside this engine. 2 days later, on August 17th, metal particles were found again. Now this airline had no option. It was clear that the engines would have to be replaced. But the problem was that Air Transat did not have any spare engine available. So they took an engine on loan from the Rolls-Royce company, and this is where the real problem begins. Now imagine, friends, your phone charger gets damaged and you use a similar charger that looks the same, but the pin inside is slightly different. In such a case, your charger will work for a few days, but then it will short-circuit. Exactly this happened with this plane. The new replacement engine that came from Rolls-Royce was of an older design. The plane's system was of a newer design. Everything looked the same from the outside, but the fitting of the fuel and hydraulic tubes inside was slightly different. And when it was delivered to Air Transat, this difference was not detected during the inspection. The work of replacing the engine begins at midnight on August 17th. This work had to be completed by Sunday afternoon because the plane had a scheduled flight at that time. This means the mechanics had a very tight deadline. As soon as the mechanics start the engine replacement work, a problem arises. The plane's hydraulic pump was not fitting onto the new engine because a fuel tube of the engine was coming in between. Now here, when the lead technician searched the Airbus parts list, he found out that the design of this engine's fuel and hydraulic tubes was very different from the rest of the plane's system. This person could not understand how to fit this old design engine with this new pump. For this, he tried to open the Rolls-Royce manual on 3 different computers, but all 3 times it did not open because the network was down. But here, something shocking happened. The service bulletin manual was actually available on offline CDs, but our lead technician brother did not even know about these CDs. Meaning, the document on which the lives of hundreds of people depended was lying in the same building, but no one tried to find it. The time pressure was very high. The plane had to be ready by Sunday afternoon. So the technician takes a shortcut here. He installs the new design fuel tubes on the engine, but he leaves the old design hydraulic tube as it was. So now on this one engine, 2 different designs of tubes were installed that were not made for each other at all. The Rolls-Royce service bulletin clearly stated that the fuel tube and hydraulic tube should always be replaced as a set. But unfortunately, because the network was down, no one had read this service bulletin. When the hydraulic system was pressurized, the flange of the hydraulic line would rotate and come closer to the fuel line. Two metal tubes that should never have touched each other began rubbing against each other. After the installation was completed, the engine was ground run. Everything looked normal. There was no leak. There was no warning. Therefore, the plane was released for the flight. After this engine was replaced, the plane flew several flights, without anyone knowing that there was a ticking time bomb inside it. With every flight, because of vibration and pressure, these two tubes would come close and start rubbing against each other. Slowly, the wall of the fuel tube was wearing away. It was just a matter of time before it completely broke. We come back, friends, to the night of August 24. Flight 236 was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Everything was normal. The flight had 46.9 metric tons of fuel loaded, which was 5.5 metric tons more than the required amount. But at 4:38 in the morning, the flight data recorder recorded that the fuel was decreasing very rapidly. Because of the hydraulic line and fuel line rubbing against each other for hours, an L-shaped crack had formed on the wall of the fuel tube, due to which the fuel had started leaking. But neither did any alarm sound in the cockpit, nor did any warning light come on. The reason behind this was that the Airbus A330 did not have any direct sensor to detect a fuel leak. Slowly, this crack became bigger and the fuel started leaking rapidly. The leak rate reached 13 metric tons per hour. None of the 306 people sitting inside the aircraft knew that the fuel of this plane was silently pouring into the Atlantic Ocean. It is only at 5:03 that the crew notices unusual oil readings in the right engine. Fuel was leaking from this very engine, but the pilots thought, why would there be a fuel leak after all? They think it must be some computer fault. 5:33, about 4 hours and 40 minutes after takeoff, an advisory message flashes in the cockpit. Fuel balancing, seen that before. The crew realizes that the fuel balance in the left and right wing tanks has become uneven. Compared to the left side, there was much less fuel on the right side. Now, fuel imbalance sometimes happens in modern aircraft in this way. There is a standard procedure to fix it. Take out the checklist and follow the steps. The crew also thought it was not such a big deal. They would handle this issue. But here, they make another big mistake. The biggest mistake of this entire incident, which turns this situation into a disaster. This crew does not follow the checklist at all. Instead, they follow the procedure from memory. The checklist clearly stated that if a fuel leak is suspected, follow the fuel leak procedure. Not the fuel imbalance procedure, but because they were working from their memory. They missed this note. To fix the fuel imbalance, the crew opened the crossfeed valve. This meant that now the remaining fuel from the left wing tanks was also going directly into the leak on the right wing. The fuel from both sides started flowing out through the same leak. The problem that the pilots tried to fix doubled the problem. Here comes a shocking coincidence. Exactly 4 years earlier, on August 24, 1997, an Air France A320 aircraft also had exactly the same kind of fuel leak issue. The French authorities had recommended that an automated fuel leak warning system be installed in Airbus. Airbus amended the procedures but did not install an automated leak warning system. Now, 4 years later, the exact same scenario was repeating on Flight 236, and if that warning system had been installed, perhaps this situation would not have happened today. And this is not just a matter of aviation safety. Even in today's digital world, we ignore similar warnings every day. Unsafe websites, tracking, cookies, phishing links. We think that nothing will happen to us. But just as Flight 236 needed an automated warning system, in the same way you also need a reliable protection system for your digital life. And this is exactly what NordVPN's threat protection feature does. NordVPN is basically a VPN app, but this feature can work even without connecting to a VPN. It automatically blocks trackers. It blocks annoying ads, and if you're about to visit a scam or phishing website, it warns you first. With one NordVPN account, you can get protection for up to 10 devices. And its VPN functionality is also very useful in itself for spoofing your location. While traveling, different countries often have country restrictions. It can bypass them. Coming back to our Flight 236, after opening the crossfeed, the captain expected that the fuel readings would stabilize, but the numbers kept dropping. Now the fuel also started decreasing on the left side. They could not understand what was happening. The captain told the cabin crew, look outside through the windows, check the wings and engines. See if any fuel leak is visible anywhere, but it was dark at night. Below was only the black ocean. Nothing was visible through the windows. But the people sitting on the flight were completely unaware of this. They thought that breakfast would be served shortly and the plane would land very peacefully in Lisbon. But at 5:45, so much fuel had leaked that it was no longer possible to reach Lisbon. This flight was commanded by Captain Robert Pish, who had 16,800 hours of flying experience, and with him was his co-pilot Dirk de Jager, who had 4,800 hours of flying experience. The special thing was that Captain Bush had also worked as a bush pilot. He had experience landing planes in forests and on lakes without any runway. In such a situation, seeing the fuel leaking, they decide to divert the flight. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there are some small islands that not many people know about. The Azores Islands. Captain Pish decides to divert to the largest airport located on the Terceira Island of the Azores. It was a military airbase. At 5:48, the pilots inform ATC that they now have only 7 metric tons of fuel remaining, 236 heavy, declaring fuel emergency. This largest airport of the Azores was still hundreds of miles away, and the crew still had not clearly understood that the actual problem was a fuel leak. At 6:13, the plane was still at an altitude of 34,000 feet, but it was descending toward Lajes. The pilots hoped that somehow they would reach there. But then suddenly, the right engine completely stops working because of fuel starvation. At an altitude of 34,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, this twin-engine aircraft was now operating on just one engine. ETOPS, meaning Extended Range Twin-Engine Operations Performance Standards, are designed for this condition, according to which, even after a single-engine failure because of the second engine, the plane can reach the nearest airport at a lower speed. But the problem was that it was not a normal single-engine failure. The fuel in the left engine was also almost finished, losing this. Meanwhile, the captain begins his single-engine descent. Some passengers in the cabin felt a change in the engine sound, but they still had no idea what exactly was happening. At 6:26, exactly 13 minutes after the right engine shut down, the left engine also shuts down. This aircraft, filled with 306 people, had now become a glider. This flight was still 144 kilometers away from the Azores airport. As soon as the second engine shut down, the cockpit screens went dark. The main electrical generators went off. All the cabin lights went out. The entire plane was now in darkness. People suddenly came into a situation of panic. What was happening here after all? We have fuel starvation now. The captain now realizes that if he has to save the lives of himself along with 305 people, then he will have to land this flight safely without both engines. But in history, friends, no commercial passenger jet had ever attempted such a long, powerless glide. There was no second chance here. If the plane could not reach this airport, then it would crash into the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. After both engines shut down, the plane came onto an emergency power source. RAT, full-form ram air turbine, automatically deployed. If you remember, friends, this was also mentioned in the Air India crash video. It is a small wind turbine that rotates in the air and generates emergency power so that basic instruments and some hydraulic systems can work. But to operate the RAT, the plane's minimum speed should be 140 knots. Captain Pish tells the air traffic controllers that perhaps they may have to land in the ocean itself. When the engines shut down, suddenly silence fell over the cabin. The constant humming sound that is heard in the background on every airplane had disappeared. The silence was so deep that people's ears started ringing. 57-year-old Agostino Romero heard the engines shutting down and thought about his daughters who were in Canada. The crew members were also nervous. One flight attendant came to Romero and started saying, "Please help me. Please help me." 24-year-old helicopter pilot trainee Daniel Riguvers heard the crew members shouting at each other and at the passengers. 18-year-old student Vasco dos Santos, who was sitting on this same flight, repeatedly started remembering plane crash movies, the ones he used to see in movies. Today, the same thing was happening to him in reality. For the next several minutes, the passengers sat in darkness, gliding on rolling air currents without the sound of the engines. They did not know what was below, what was going to happen next. After some time, the passengers were told that the plane might make an emergency landing in the ocean. Attention plane. The captain had officially accepted that the plane might land in the water. The flight director, who is the senior-most cabin crew member, takes out their emergency action plan checklist. The cabin crew is told to take out their life jackets and get ready for the passenger briefing. Slowly pressurizing, we crew members tell the passengers to take out their life jackets. Instructions for brace positions are given in English and French. Some Portuguese passengers were also present on this flight who did not know either of these two languages. Because of the language, they were having difficulty understanding what was actually happening. There were also problems with the life jackets. Some jackets were single strap, some were two strap, and the passengers could not find the straps caught in the tightly bound elastic bands. Many passengers were physically helped by the crew members to put on their jackets. When the crew started demonstrating the emergency water landing procedures, some people screamed, some people turned completely white, and many people started praying. Grace Romero tightly held the hand of the passenger sitting beside her. There was just this hope that everything would be okay. She just wanted the plane not to fall into the ocean. Passenger Mark McKinnon remembered Ethiopian Airlines Flight 9 and 61 at that time. He had seen in a documentary how a few years earlier in 1996, an airplane had fallen into the Indian Ocean. It broke apart immediately upon touching the sea, and everyone was killed. McKinnon knew because of that documentary that the chances of surviving a water crash were very low. He had accepted death. But her husband Bazikas, who was sitting with her, refused to accept this. He made a plan that they would fall into the ocean, get out through the exit, and swim to the shore. He was sure that even after falling into the sea, we know how to swim. We can survive. He tells McKinnon, "We will need our shoes. We will need our shoes." Making a controlled landing of an airplane on water is called water ditching. It is one of the most dangerous emergency procedures in aviation. Data shows that 95% of occupants survive the initial impact of ditching, but after that, due to drowning and hypothermia, the overall survival rate falls to only 76%. Now the problem was that this was average data, and the case of Flight 236 was very different from the average. This flight was flying in the darkness of night. It was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. During night ditching, pilots cannot see the height of the waves and the surface. Apart from this, even in the month of August, the water in this ocean is so cold that people can die because of hypothermia. Outside the windows, only black darkness was visible. No stars, no lights, no land, no signs, just the cold Atlantic Ocean thousands of feet deep below. Some passengers had taken out their family photos. Some had closed their eyes. A mother had tightly held her child against her chest. Captain Pish and co-pilot Dejagi were working on the emergency checklist. They were preparing for a visual runway approach. Without engine power, the pilots had only one chance to land on the runway. There was no go-around option. At 6:31, the pilots contacted Lejes approach. At that time, the plane was at 27,000 feet and Lejes was 33 nautical miles away. At 6:36, the crew saw the runway lights. They reported that the plane was now only 14 nautical miles away. The captain said that they could see the runway's flashing lights from very far away, and they were confident that they had enough altitude to glide to the airport. At 6:43, the landing gear comes down, and then at 6:45, this plane lands at Lejes Air Base. From the time both engines shut down until landing, the plane flew for about 19 minutes without engine power. This was unprecedented in commercial aviation history and was the biggest record so far, but the plane's landing was not smooth at all. Without engine reverse thrust, extreme braking was applied. The main wheels locked up. The tires wore down and deflated. The wheel-bearing journals were worn down. Sparks and flames started coming out of the landing gear. A small fire also started because of the friction, but fortunately it was quickly extinguished. The impact of the landing was so strong that the passengers were thrown forward in their seats. Some things that people were holding in their hands fell down, and then as soon as the plane stopped, applause started in the cabin. In less than 2 minutes, all 306 people are evacuated from the plane. Not a single person dies. There are 2 serious injuries and 16 minor injuries, but most of them also occur while getting down from the evacuation slide. After the landing, Captain Pish began to be seen as a hero. However, just a few days later, Pish's past came to light and a storm broke out in the media. It was revealed that around 20 years earlier, Captain Pish had been arrested in the United States for transporting drugs. He had served part of a 5-year sentence in Georgia and had only been pardoned the previous year. This news raised questions about how an ex-drug smuggler could become a commercial airline pilot. But despite his past, Captain Pish remained a hero for the passengers. After this incident, Canada's Transport Minister imposed the biggest fine in Canadian aviation history on Air Transat Airlines, $200. In addition, the passengers also filed a $30 million class action lawsuit against the airline. The lawsuit stated that the passengers suffered such severe trauma that they became physically ill and might suffer its effects for the rest of their lives. The story of Flight 236 is one of the most incredible survival stories in aviation history. When everything was over, 306 people were standing safe and sound at the Azores airbase. Some people were simply looking at the ground, as if they could not believe that there was solid ground beneath their feet. Like every flight disaster, friends, it was not just one mistake that made this night possible, but several things had failed. Rolls-Royce's missing warning, the shortcut taken by the mechanics, the manual that nobody read, the checklist that the crew followed from memory, and the leak warning system that should have been installed 4 years earlier but was not installed. See you in the next video with another fascinating movie, mystery, or true story. Until then, take care, stay curious, and keep exploring.